What is wisdom? Why is it important? What is counter-wisdom? When discussing the topic of wisdom, it's worthwhile mentioning counter-wisdom. Human counter-wisdom efforts may be more prevalent than effective efforts to promote wisdom. Counter-wisdom agents are truly everywhere, and being able to recognize them and avoid being impacted by them is part of striving to capture the real deal. To complicate the situation, many counter-wisdom agents see and bill themselves as public benefactors, dedicated to helping to keep or put others on track. Followers often support them with bubble-expanding admiration, while in fact they should be seen as nickel-plated robot technicians struggling to control their supposedly ignorant followers. Cult managers might be an accurate title. Wisdom is the ability to apply factual knowledge combined with solid experience in making effective judgments and decisions regarding future actions. It is a complex individual skill that is developed over time, and many factors can promote or retard the development process. Lack of factual knowledge, distortion of one's view of reality, and restriction of freedom to experience and understand reality are all negative factors. I have had opportunity to endure prolonged cult tactics and have observed that cult agents working at convincing others of the impossible and then pressuring them to retain this twisted conviction unleashes a huge reservoir of creativity that can gush non-stop seemingly till doomsday. Cult agents appear as individuals and also as broad coordinated teams. Here is effective counter-wisdom. The dynamics of this human superpower can be witnessed in multiple fields because multiple underlying drivers can generate the same forces and operating style. Desire for power or fame or wealth or self-satisfaction, self-endorsement and self-justification, fear of change, and addiction to past idiocy all can burst forth in ways that can be classed as varied forms of cult control. Commitment to countering the obvious stimulates brilliant creative productions and fuels a steady volume of output, such that naive victims don't notice obvious reality and common sense being buried under layers of the chaff of truth, with the attention-snagging vital seeds still somewhat intact but effectively sterilized. The influencer challenge seems to supercharge the agent of the impossible who taps into a limitless reservoir of fairy fluff, enhanced and often funded by the dynamic cyclical tornado of rising hot air fanned by mesmerized crowd support. Keep them busy so they don't have time to stop and think. Every influencer knows that there is no rest for the wicked. The flow can't stop. Steady sounds and visions are vital for the spell to endure. Keep creating and broadcasting bullshit, or the steady rain of common sense will start to wash out the eyes of the crowd so they can see real light. As well as generating endless blah, 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 steer clear of details of real substance and logic. Those are a slippery slope for the cult manager. Negative influencers or cult control can be seen as carbon monoxide poisoning, where oxygen-carrying blood cells are taken out of service by the ingestion of cultic carbon monoxide. Having the oxygen of life cut off, replaced, or restricted by a narrow and controlling concept or personality is not a positive situation. Cult control is akin to hijacking your red blood cells and stopping their oxygen-securing potential. Create fear or any messaging other than the official line, and your dependents stay appreciatively under your protective sway. Here is another helpful analogy. Visualize a huge forest of obvious reality and common sense, the forest of life. Within the forest, there are multiple small clearings surrounded by specially crafted trees that have a cult-oriented aura. And let's call them cultivars. Residents of the small clearings are influenced to see themselves as being unique and privileged and fear leaving their familiar clearing and pushing past the encircling cultivars. These trapped souls are the Corbett associate who can only see the path he is walking on, or the Corbett youth who has supposedly learned it all in an unrealistically short period of time. One true religion bodies have clearings of multiple sizes, many quite large, some minuscule. The anti-wisdom victims can't see the forest of life for the insulating wall of cultivar trees, and the cultivars are the product of minds other than those of the entrapped victims. But even the current cultivar designers and builders and sustainers are often the victims of a higher level of an earlier edition of cultic mind. The cult concept can apply to religion, politics, history, economics, physics, biology, commerce, marketing, and advertising, health science, human relations, really anything related to life. An educator can be a cult leader. A parent can be a cult leader within his own family. A professional can be a cult leader in his or her field of expertise. Any force that restricts or distorts learning about and applying reality in a wise manner can be seen as a cultic controller or influencer. When others insist on doing your thinking for you and pressure you to quit thinking for yourself or to not trust your own mind, you should be wary. Advice is one thing. Concerned direction is one thing. Stifling control that smothers your own mind is another level. Another educational analogy that illustrates a form of cult control, perhaps somewhat unintentionally and in a very touching and dramatic way, was the 1993 Secret Garden movie, directed by Holland and Coppola. Character Colin Craven is confined to a gloomy castle and believes he is a health basket case threatened by multiple hazards that lie in wait outside the castle. Puppet shows are his imaginary adventureland in his restricted world. Characters Mary Lennox and Dickon Sowerby use Dickens' pony to pull the shutters off the windows of Colin's room. Colin is initially terrified. Then, Mary and Dickon manage to drag him out of the restrictive gloom and gradually introduce him to the sunshine-filled world outside the castle walls that he willingly had accepted as his boundaries. I was happily living in a type of cult environment, but circumstances chased me out of my little clearing in the forest, followed shortly by exposure to the 1993 movie. For me, the movie exposure, ideally timed for my expulsion into freedom, was an educational amplifier. I am a real-life Colin Craven. The closing scenes of the sunshine and green expanses pictured outside Misselthwaite Manor and the plug that the whole world is a garden had a major impact. And wow, it's true. Few people are unaffected by narrow cult thinking. That movie truly holds a major lesson for just about everyone. The expanse of life is before us if we can open our minds and eyes. It is there to teach, and what's more, each of us is an integral element in the massive forest. Talking about the forest of life illustrates the use of an analogy, and the real forest of life is packed with analogies, several of which have been commented on. Life is a dynamic, moment-by-moment learning experience, and the more you are able to see and understand its dynamics and scale, both in size and duration, the more you appreciate the magnitude and value of your personal, unique, multi-aspect gift. the gift of existence, the gift of consciousness with the capacity to think and do, the gift of personal freedom. All vital elements. In short form, the gift of life. And each day and minute in the big school, forest of life, is dynamic opportunity. The simplest struggle and job is an analogy gold mine. Appreciate your setting, and there is never a dull moment. Boredom? Think about Corbett's walking associate. It is a solid reality that interaction of human minds yields marvelous stimulations and refinements in an individual's thinking, be it during design and build projects or in general learning. A problem is that all humans, each of us included, have strengths and weaknesses, and who you deal with has a large impact on your own thinking, and the result may not be positive. Losers tend to clump and amplify their deficiencies. So how do you pick positive influencers? Or at least, how do you pick out other minds who, even if they are a loser in certain areas, have redeeming strengths that can be tapped for positive effect? Few minds are without some area of strength. The answer is, if you have clung to a bedrock-connected thought progression, you can usually pick out winners or winning specialty zones at others and avoid blinding smoke and potholes. Interaction with creative minds is of amazing value so long as the exchange proves to be a boost and not a degrading experience. You are in control of your affairs. You can pick and choose thought bricks from any source. Make sure that you are connected to a solid mooring that gives you direction and judgment, and appreciate all the positives that surround you, be they nicely packaged or half-empty and damaged, or in nicely packaged or in half-empty and damaged boxes. People can be crazy, but not necessarily stupid, and madmen often see golden concepts before their more sane and restrained fellow beings. A bedrock-grounded mind can evaluate thought bricks, whatever their source. There is another vital level. Many can't see the forest for the cultivar trees. And once you see the forest and its lessons, be careful to avoid the forest preventing you from seeing the mastermind giant who designed and built the forest, altruistically handed out the sparkling gem of life that is you, and provided and provides the massive underlying systems, history, and future that support and give meaning to all the human gems that have ever lived. There lies the true and massive bedrock that occupies the present, the past, and the future. Yes, massive. An effective connection to that bedrock is the true starting seed around which each freewheeling pearl of wisdom develops. Developed and effective freedom is not simple, and robots are not on the long-range radar. This isn't emotional fluff, and it isn't some sort of faith-based whimsy. It is cold Sherlock Holmes-style logic. The obvious facts that anyone can easily establish. Open your eyes to underlying but solidly attached facts. Elementary, my dear Watson. And there is a huge personality aspect to everything we experience and are. Louis Agassiz, somewhat untouched by fabricated cultic nonsense, seemed to appreciate that incredibly positive fact. And it is here we have the biggest turbulent hotspot for the mixing of fact and fiction and spin and control, where wisdom and clear thinking is so often is so important, yet so often under attack. Every facet of life is touched in a major way by this intersection of physical science and appreciation of underlying yet totally obvious realities. Here is where bedrock logic is so vital as a thought brick foundation. The hedgehog, one big thing. Okay, so fact. We are in effect mini-gods, teeny copies of the real thing. And our vital features are, first, we exist and have life at all, and then that we exist with a mind combined with creative capacity, combined with freedom to use our capabilities in any way we wish. Our mind power gives us an appreciation of the past, present, and future. It gives us reasoning power. It gives us an appreciation of our status, the status of others, and the dynamics of interactions between others, including ourselves. Another fact: it is easy for each of us to appreciate and apply the advantages of cooperation with others and between others, and how this characteristic of mini-gods is so effective, but in a positive sense, both in a positive sense and also in a negative sense. Our reality makes it clear to us that positive cooperation allows amazing progress and achievement, and that lack of cooperation and interpersonal war are a nightmare. Another fact: the existence of physical life, period, is so multifaceted and complex and interwoven and so similar to much simpler mechanical complexities that we ourselves can work with, at least partially understand, and develop to amazing levels, that it is clear to any thoughtful mind that this seeming dream cannot be an undirected random occurrence. Common sense and the hard logic of experience tell us that each of us is the beneficiary of a complicated, unique gift that reflects an infinitely bigger capacity than mankind has access to. We are blessed with the capacity to replicate life, but only through amazing tools that the greater power has designed, built, and given us access to. Long ago, Rudi Virchow is given credit for establishing that life only comes from life, and no one has disproved him in the meantime, despite volumes of blather on the topic that degrade the appreciation of this impressive reality. True scientific progress continually deepens our appreciation of the staggering complexity of the life system, a complexity that is totally out of the human capability league. So now, a spin on the facts. With creative word hijacking and creative association of impossibilities with carefully selected buzzwords, most of which have partial validity, such as natural selection, transmutation, and evolution, the mind-boggling scale and complexity and wonderment of life has been reduced to a strange fluke surfacing out of an unknown past, and is cast as a lottery scenario crapshoot hardly worth puzzling over. And another spin. We are all there is in the realm of conscious beings, and our joint efforts to preserve our fluke existence is crucial. Another spin. We are the superstars, or at least some of us are, and with good direction and control coming from our elite members, nothing is impossible. And finally, another spin. Our difficulties are due to the general stupidity of the masses, and the solution is the wise control by our elite members, and this is something that we must sort out if mankind is to survive. These facts and their related spins are realities that we all confront, and the In a Box project is designed to shine a light on the associated challenges that is faced by each of us. Are you, Colin Craven, convinced you are a cripple, totally dependent on puppet shows for information, and locked in by the protective walls and shutters of Misselthwaite Manor? Afraid of enlightenment? I escaped, and that moment was a life highlight and underlies this presentation. At this point, I'm going to digress and give you a personal example of a type of inverse secret garden excuse me, that has provided me with hours of enjoyable education and a type of relaxed recreation. Many readers will be able to think of similar experiences they have enjoyed and learned from. Many years ago, I had the rather unique opportunity to get to know a retired farmer named Anthony, who lived close to my own home, and through a somewhat fluke string of events got to cut hay on his rather large acreage yard, surrounded by farmland that he had rented out when he retired. One haying section was a 17-acre timothy field that was completely surrounded by a thick and tall tree border. Antony had planted the trees in the timothy grass. For years I cut that field, and when I did, it was like dropping into a distant world of peace and quiet. In my years of haying, I do not recall ever seeing an adult person at that field, apart from family members that dropped me off to my equipment or whatever. But it was quite an isolated spot. Even Antony was never present in that field when I was working. A small, inquisitive neighbor boy did show up momentarily a couple of times on his little dirt bike. I was basically on my own, apart from hawks, field mice, crows, Canada geese, and robins, and an occasional deer and coyote. It was in effect my world without the cost of owning it. The sky was above, the four green walls with its constantly changing details. No power lines passed over the zone despite a large power plant being less than a mile away with spreading lines akin to a spider web. A large city was just outside the protective wall of green, but inside the garden zone there was minimal evidence of its closeness. Antony remained very active prior to his dying in his 101st year, and eventually the farmland and the timothy field were sold, but the buyer did nothing with the timothy field, somewhat blockaded by its unbroken green walls. It sat untouched for 4 years, at which point I had the surprise opportunity to clean it up and resume cutting its hay. The generous owners basically gave me a caretaking opportunity with the hay that I valued highly as payment. The land is good, and I always favored the hay in that it was as organic as you can get it. The field had never been sprayed or chemically fertilized, and after 4 years of dormancy, the organic content was even greater. Now I got the pleasure of haying the garden while getting the hay for free. I bush mowed the entire zone in the spring of 2025, and then returned in July to cut the hay. After such a long dormancy period, the variety of plants that had moved into the timothy was quite amazing. As I circled the field with my haybine, it was like touring a biology lesson or an art gallery. The plant varieties and designs were a pleasure to witness. As I cut progressive seasons of hay, most of the plants will likely diminish or disappear, and the grasses will take over again. But 2025, after the long field holiday, has been unique. Now consider the realities that are on the table in my secret garden. In this case, the protective wall of green kept the phony illusions that obsess the world around out of my mind and allowed me to experience pure reality without distraction. The lessons flowed. Haying can seem to some to be a boring circling of same. But for me, it is a chance to observe and think, sort of an enforced Agassiz experience. Consider the varieties of plants that I experienced in the garden. 4 years earlier, only a few of them were evident. Where did they come from? How did they survive the winter? How can each of them coexist with the wild variety of other plants and insects and microbes? What about the chemistry complexity that each plant utilizes to secure a food supply in the midst of different plants, each with a slightly different agenda? Why all the flower varieties? Why the varied leaf designs? Why the prickles on the thistle plants, but not on other varieties? Consider the wild variety of structures and reproductive methods. What engineering principles are utilized in the variety of stems? Consider the wind-blown seeds, no small trick to come up with a system that allows for the growth and final release at the proper time of all those effective parachute units. Notice the grasshopper in the dandelion puff. More artwork and functionality on an even higher level. To think that all these varied plants, with their very different structures and functional mechanisms, sprang from a related ancestor is as off-the-wall a concept as believing that all Ford cars somehow sprang out of the Model T, with no involvement of humans with their mind-creative capacity combo. And each unique and replicating plant would be toast were it not for it fitting into a maze of even more complex supportive systems, just like the Fords would die without roads and fuel supplies. Look, and then dream of a cosmic roulette wheel, if you wish, but a rational mind will look and see one big and brilliant personality, akin to oneself, but mega times as powerful. Like wow. Consider how we humans can do such an impressive job of replicating so many of the mechanical and chemical principles utilized in these myriad plants. And we appreciate recognition when we do a brilliant job of making something that works well. But yet, so often we are dumb fools at being blind and oblivious to brilliance that is beating us on the head. Traveling from my home base to the secret garden accentuates the lessons of the garden. My activity there would seem to most to be totally out of step with current economic realities. Realities that I am quite certain are temporary human fabrications that cannot endure. Our family has the unique luxury of a single milk cow, and that cow has the somewhat unique privilege of living on carefully provided organic feed that is relatively untouched by the wizardry of modern agricultural practices. And the manure and grazing activity of that cow and others that we own and that provide meat for our family also factor into garden and grain production that we fully utilize. The experience of our family strongly suggests that the extensive medical systems that have developed for crops, animals, and humans would suffer a huge business evaporation should the world population as a whole suddenly spend what our family spends on these failure-motivated areas. On my short trip to the garden, I pass visually impressive monocrop fields with minimal weed growth. Even thick crop stands and precise sprayer wheel tracks. A tall and thick cornfield is on the other side of the north wall of the secret garden. Inspection of that field shows soil akin to a desert apart from the corn plants. Remarkable! No weeds, only corn. How is this possible? Two small fields I pass for a reason I am somewhat unsure of, have been reduced to desert status apart from a few tough weeds by application of glyphosate. Across the road is a massive market garden that I am quite confident owes its current financial viability to the same systems employed on the fields just mentioned. Impressive! Immediate dollars in the bank for landowners and farmers. But in a complex living system, is this performance as impressive as a quick glance would indicate? Is Peter being robbed to pay Paul? Less than 5 miles from the secret garden is a massive medical center that represents huge financial and human resource investment and reaction to physical misery. It is linked to a constantly increasing need and a constantly increasing tax load. Given the obvious complexity of life highlighted in the secret garden, complexity that the crop and medical scientists have only scratched the surface of, in conjunction with my own daily moves and habits and the seeming results of such, can you blame me for feeling that I am witnessing evidence of the equivalent of young children pretending that they are competent at maintaining a high-tech modern airliner? Consider if you may be out of your league if you are achieving fly and crash results in your total system. If you think the garden display is the result of chance, well, surely, with human mind power, much greater things are for the taking. If you could understand and explain the details of how a solitary wasp hornet queen can hibernate over a frigid Canadian winter, and that is how reality works, re-emerge in the spring, and somehow trigger the building of a complex social and technical and physical system that is vital for the wasp line to survive, and have this happen year after year over centuries, you are likely a competitor with the Creator for intelligence, if not total capacity. If such microsystem performance is an impressive mystery to you, and it most certainly is, some reserve and questioning humility is in order. And that goes for anyone who, like the wasp, is physical, yet lives, i.e., everyone. Such simple realities of my little meadow zone are mind-blowing. How can such massive technical information and programming be so miniaturized and constructed to provide such reliable performance over hundreds and thousands of years? And you think that screwing around with tactics that drop some type of plants or insects on a massive scale, in the short term at least, isn't going to impact other mechanisms in the larger system. As stated, there is a different world, humanly altered, just outside my secret garden. If you backtrack to the presentation on Louis Agassiz, consider two of his quotes. First, philosophers and theologians have yet to learn that a physical fact is as sacred as a moral principle. Our own nature demands from us this double allegiance. So, we are physical and mechanical, but are living godlets, living, conscious, thinking, creative, free. For us, morals are real. We aren't robots. Agassiz goes on. The study of nature is intercourse with the highest mind. You should never trifle with nature. At her lowest, her works are the works of the highest powers, the highest something in the universe, in whatever way we look at it. This is the charm of study from nature itself. She brings us back to absolute truth wherever we wander. Agriculture and life are closely connected, and increasingly so in the long term. Physical health has a close connection to agriculture and diet, and physical health is life. And life and solid religion are seamless. Solid religion doesn't support maiming or killing off living entities. Agriculture needs to be supportive, not destructive. Do you think my secret garden experience makes me admire the insight of Louis Agassiz? As I travel to this tiny nature oasis, I see visions of a system and its participants leaping off a cliff and having a great old time during the fall. A recent instantaneous wasp bite with its amazingly effective chemistry, combined with the knowledge of how that tiny life experience with its complex system-backed delivery can happen, to me is a wake-up call that everyone needs to experience and internalize. Bedrock logic is knocking. My haybine is rather old and has some irritating age-related mechanical issues. New Holland engineers haven't figured out how to build a healing feature into their machines. The reality that we all know tells me that the mechanical problems will not mysteriously correct themselves. So I designed and built a steel ring component that locks a vital key in place on a rotor axle. Actually, there are 2 axles and 2 rings. The vital keys would quickly vibrate out were it not for the clamping action of my rings. Great. This is true evolution. A created entity, in this case my old haybine, has a failing. An experienced mind cases the situation and designs a solution and builds a solution and applies it. But during my garden stint, the set screws in the ring work loose, and I lose one ring and one key. The hard logic of experience reveals flaws in my understanding. The set screws cannot be tightened enough due to their design. Evolution continues. A mind sizes up the failure. I zip back to my shop, grab a replacement ring, and replace the initial set screws with hex head bolts. Now I can apply far greater force, and the repair works. The haybine completes the haying job. The machine has evolved, but it didn't improve for the better via mindless chance. The hard logic of experience was responded to, and a mind with creative capacity has generated an evolutionary upgrade. No small matter. A mind selects a different design of screw, and creative hands switch out the unsuitable screw. No mind, no creative capacity, no evolutionary upgrade. In effect, had I not taken obvious required action, there would be no hay for the cows come winter, and they would have starved and died. Perhaps you notice that this reality experience seems to clash with the theory of evolution. Evolution is real. A flight of irrational theory is nonsense. Then, partway through the haying operation, I jump in my truck and run to the city and to the Co-op filling station and load a jerry can with diesel fuel to power my tractor and finish the haying job. Here we have obvious system interdependence. There were minds and creative abilities at work on multiple fronts to match that fuel to the evolving tractor designs, and lots of other players involved in having that fuel quickly available for me to easily secure and transport. All of these very complex points are simplistic realities that everyone experiences and to some degree understands. Now, back to my secret garden and the multiple orbits of the Timothy field. Some might think, what are the implications of the use of diesel fuel? And what are the implications of plastic baler twine? I don't know. How much kicking can the created system handle? What is the impact of my hay cutting on a field that never has animals grazing on it? Are there spin-off impacts of my key securing ring? And I'd say definitely some. But where is the line between rolling over and dying and going so hard that you wear out your welcome? Do you pull weeds by hand or invent a hoe? The point at hand is that huge improvements can be made with regard to being in touch with obvious realities. Standing on solid ground is usually more productive than wading through a swamp. Evolutionary pretending is not bedrock. It isn't even solid ground. I have cut hay with a scythe and stacked with a fork. I appreciate what my haybine does, and am well aware of the evolution of that device from its first version in 1964. I am thankful for the concept of the universal joint that allows the tractor to power the machine around tight corners. That one component in itself is a creative marvel, developed over time and the product of numerous fabrication techniques and manufacturing companies. Here is true evolution. Hundreds of brilliant minds and fabricators building, testing, refining, rebuilding, and on, and producing a functional item. The result is on display. That is reality, that everyone who achieves anything accepts and understands. Exceptions do not exist. We have freedom and responsibility to utilize life. Reality won't allow us to sit still. And wisdom with regard to putting one foot in front of the other is vital. A clear view of reality is also vital. Living in a dream world of thinking that the boss of the operation doesn't exist and is inconsequential with regard to the scale of the business that we obviously have to work with isn't reality. And then, to confidently push ahead thinking that you are in effect the god and more than capable of managing the business also is not reality. Such mass stupidity fits nicely with the popularity of cliff leaping. Taking steps is living, but eyeing your footing prior to taking a step is not leaping off cliffs. Staying within the bounds of understanding is a long-term success principle. Why is it impossible to walk across a room? Because if you walk halfway across, you still have halfway to go. And then, if you walk halfway across that distance, you still have halfway to go. Thus, you can divide the distance by 1/2 an infinite number of times, and it becomes clear that you can never actually complete your walk across the room. Does this analysis convince you? Well, the theory of positive development without a mind or minds with associated creative capacity is equally as logical. Numerous word and mind games have been remarkably successful at revealing how the human mind can incorporate total stupidity alongside amazing brilliance. Now consider the multiple unique plants that I motor past in the secret garden. If you have thought at all about the presentation so far in this Proof-in-a-Box project, you'll realize that the theory of evolution, though super popular and integrated into our world system, is total nonsense. Complex multi-system development does not occur without mind power linked to creative power. Physical living items and systems are really just like mechanical items and systems, but on a higher complexity level that surpasses human comprehension. That pine tree and thistle and alfalfa plant, and on and on and on, have no connection to each other than their designer and builder and all the interconnections that he has built into the living fabric that keeps them all jointly functional over endless generations. How did the units get to the garden and thrive and survive the winter? Same for insects and birds and microbes. And how does this variety of living organisms stay balanced and avoid one type crowding all the rest out? What is often called transmutation is one reason and reveals a level of design function that is even more of a mind blower than momentary complexity and survival. And consider the artwork that is on display. An evolutionary theory victim would be like the Corbett Pathwatcher and react much like a dumb animal. An Agassiz thinker would say, I do not feel obligated to believe that the personality who clearly has the capacity to plan and execute this totally amazing display that is so pleasant for me and others to experience is an irrational ogre. If humans, with their obvious intelligence, are generally so stupid as to believe that this mindless development story, or so unthinking as to believe that a super capable creative personality is akin to an artist who revels in brutally trashing his most impressive works, as in you and me. If so, then I think that some sort of ingenious educational play is unfolding. In an environment of miraculous creativity, detail, and generosity, such a wild and standout abnormality cannot be thought a thoughtless mistake. How can genius and idiot form a Siamese twin? When a person reaches a point where he realizes that he has been a complete egotistic fool, then he is in a position to launch into real education. And that long-term game plan is arguably underway. But be it possible to read the designer's lips and eyes and skip Shit-Kicking 101 and enroll immediately in Perks of Living 101, well, why not? That such a high level of deception exists in the spotlight of such a technical wizard tells you that this abnormality isn't accidental and unplanned. But there is also no doubt that, for thoughtful rebels, there is an option of not being a complacent fool. So to summarize my analogy, Paradise Story, In this incident, I have the good fortune to get plunked in a beautiful educational oasis, and the pleasant realities that I am living and viewing right now shout at me, no, sing to me, that common sense and reality and true religion and a very big benefactor are all unified, and the fact that this arrangement is on the table right now tells me that everything is under control and there is a force in charge that has the finesse and power and intent to blast into a glorious future. And furthermore, everyone has secret garden opportunities under their noses and on the other side of the smoke screen that many allow themselves to be blinded by. Antony and I often had short chats each season when I cut his hay, and I gained many valuable insights from him. He was a unique, multifaceted man who I admired greatly. He made good use of his 100 years. He was wise, not an old fool. Having the ongoing opportunity to enjoy his garden creation at no cost to me is an unusual perk in my life, amplified by my positive memory of Antony. I joke with those who knew Antony and are aware of his connection to the Timothy field that I often see his face peeking out of the forest wall that surrounds the oasis. Take a simple test. What do you see on the screen? What is on the screen isn't what is important. Your end of the processing operation. You are the star and focus of the exercise. You have just proven, in the milli-moment between the screen image with its reality connections and your mind, that you have been given the unique gift of life, existence, mind power, creative capacity, a dramatic map to live on, and freedom. Ponder the implications and the educational options. The reality of your existence is a fact, and that fact is connected to other facts that are vital to appreciate. If you are still listening and following, you are on to the ultimate role. Welcome to life, or at least the early stages of the experience. And it appears that it can only get better. Not necessarily instantly, but the incredible visible foundation shows that in the long term, the future is glowing. In a world of ditz thinkers and seemingly ballooning unhinged idiocy, there is great advantage in locking onto a bit of hedgehog thinking, knowing one big thing. Even when you focus on flashing back to historic explorers of life, how do you identify the wisdom of age versus talkers who are simply stumbling fools who inevitably aged? Grounding on personally observable bedrock logic is the place to start, and the proof-in-a-box exercise is focused on this habit of looking for ground zero and carefully expanding from that solid base. Establish that start point, advance and build from there, and you will find that you have been equipped with a machete that allows you to advance through the current jungle of interconnected facts and opinions, some accurate, some nonsense, stirred by the constantly churning tornadoes of time and tangled by the pesky agents of counter-wisdom. The option is before you to personally apply this presentation and live. Wow! Exciting. No commission to pay, no copyright restrictions. You are in the driver's seat. There are real investment costs, but you are your own accountant, and if you manage your affairs wisely, even educational blunders won't mean ultimate bankruptcy, only direction refinement. Further, the massive, brilliantly complex, detailed, time-tested, unasked for, but altruistically given life provision system gift arguably provides assurance that your own thoughtful investment will ultimately yield you billionaire status. Those who dream that they exist in mindless chaos soup can inspire those who have connected to visible reality, and will eventually join the success train, motivated by humility and propelled by their own boots kicking them in the ass. A somewhat famous Ernest Hemingway quote pulled from one of his books is, "How did you go bankrupt?" "Two ways, gradually, then suddenly." That is the negative use of the all too often observation that has some connection to cliff jumping. It is equally accurate to ask, how did you become a life billionaire? Two ways, gradually, then suddenly. Gradual and snap combinations are a reality of the life experience, and the patient winner who is on track for success will keep this in mind. Why don't we do a bit of a review? I plugged the proof box as unique in that it is a super value, yet hook-free. You owe me nothing, and your future personal course has no umbilical cord connection to anything other than the huge reality that you and everybody else live in. The summary of the box project and the Sir Voice and Lady Voice presentation use common sense to beat up the groundless and damaging concept of our complex existence and freedom without a background mind and connected creative capacity. In other words, slamming the deviously named and impossible theory of evolution. Discussion of Rudy Virchow and Louis Agassiz took you back to a time before the mindless evolution fairy tale managed to so effectively envelop logic in smog and carbon monoxide. And the stereo presentation plugged the unity of physical reality with spiritual reality and the wall-to-wall evidence of a father figure who is very altruistic and very big, and very directly accessible to those who appreciate at least a glimmer of what he is up to. Now, the wisdom presentation has promoted connection to reality, avoidance of counter-wisdom agents, and hopefully highlighted the amazingly positive situation we, as in every living being, find ourselves in. I was on my way to Antony's secret garden with my old Ford tractor, and I motored past the house of a man named Bruce, no longer living, who was from my hometown prior to us both settling close to the city of Saskatoon. I was slightly aware of him as a youth, and also as an older man, but to a remote observer such as myself, he was a somewhat inconsequential personality. When he was alive, I know that if you compared him to any other human, the similarities would outweigh the differences greatly. His existence and capacities, as with any human, were mind-boggling. I am rather old, and like any older person, I have seen many people come and go. When you are young, life is endless and exploding with now, and the future is even more exciting. But physical age shrinks time, and passing Bruce's former home triggered the Dylan tune Shooting Star. Bruce and so many others I have known, against the background of experienced time, are indeed like shooting stars. Seen a shooting star tonight, and I thought of you. Seen a shooting star tonight, and I thought of me. We're all shooting stars, so bright, yet so short, so remarkable, but so seemingly temporary. But is the dramatic effect of a burnout, or a hint of greater things to come, was more achieved in that flash than is generally appreciated? Consider just one tiny physical fact, and consider the huge spin-off facts that are potentially attached. Science and natural history prove that a map and a homing instinct to a specific spot are somehow embedded in the brain of the monarch butterfly, and are retained over multiple generations each year and for centuries of generations. For starters, it is a remarkable engineering feat that this tiny creature can progress from egg to caterpillar to pupa to a butterfly that can effectively fly and then accurately migrate hundreds of miles. But how can a map and a powerful motivation to utilize that map accurately generation after generation, be explained. You and I cannot be explained by massive time and impossible fabricated principles that exist only in the minds of dreamers, while never being observed in reality. We are designed and built by a mega genius builder who has capacity so great that the science that we do have the capacity to utilize reveals performance capacities in realms that we cannot fathom, let alone enter. If a simple insect system is obviously built on mechanisms of such microscopic magnitude, what underlying marvels are incorporated in the existence of each miraculous human? Our temporary, God-level existence and freedom stands on a huge background foundation of effort and unasked-for generosity, and the obviously inspired Bible shows a designed future is part of the engineered experience. So what unappreciated effects are occurring at each moment of our meteoric ride? The scientific appreciation of the monarch butterfly and its inbuilt marvels, and perhaps its metamorphism capacities, are an illustration that we should give focused thought to while we live in the secret garden. It is my contention that the groundwork that any human life establishes, no matter how short or seemingly flawed the existence ride may be, is a vital stepping stone to a further chapter in this unique thing called life. I argue that we live in a wisdom school, and Corbett's education story is a brilliant appreciation of that reality. Simply living along with a massive student body is educational even for Corbett's a path watcher in his simplistic youth. Winners and losers both learn from each other, and everyone is in the experience. Applying Corbett's advice and appreciating our lesson-laden environment makes our flash passing that much brighter and enjoyable. The magnitude of the situation matches the magnitude of the altruistic boss. Look around you. Enjoy, appreciate, learn. Talk to others as in anyone who is in the same experience boat as you are, and connect with the boss as much as possible despite the crowd of counter-wisdom agents who are intent, often blindly, on blocking your pathway. And appreciate that all physical reality is the box, and that accurately analyzing the box with all its in-your-face realities forces any living being to think outside the box. Go for it, and I will do the same, and as soon as time allows, I will crank out another observation from my own ongoing experience. And rest assured, we are on a roll that the boss is not going to allow to be stopped.